you led your podcast on Thursday. You had a nice little monologue about the MVP race and how toxic it's been. And you made the same point that I made in my little quick thing I did at the top, that the whole reason we have all these voters is because sometimes you have years where people disagree on stuff. And then it comes down to, hey, we polled 100 people and 60 people thought this and 40 people thought this. And that's how it went. I think with the MVP, to me, it's crazy how I went through all the races. I wrote down every single MVP race that was separated by 150 points or less. And in the last 16 years, we've only had it one time. We've only had one like actual close MVP race, and it was 2017 Westbrook Harden with Kawhi as the third guy, where Westbrook had 888 points, 69 first place votes. Harden had 753 points, 22 first place votes. And then other than that, there's been pretty much consensus every year, which is, I think, the part people have missed with the Jokic stuff the last 2 years. Like, there was pretty major consensus that he won. When Bird won his 3 MVPs, there was a ton of consensus for that. For the most part, we've had consensus. I went back, though. I was surprised. Both of Duncan's MVPs were way closer than I remember. Do you remember that? I remember the kid one being a debate. I didn't remember that the next year, him versus Garnett was like one of the closest ones we've ever had.
I just remember that like Garnett felt like it was a little bit like Dirk, where like, when's this guy going to win his?
Yeah.
And maybe that's what Embiid's going through right now. You know, watching these games and watching them every night, and then, you know, going, wait, that guy ended up not winning one. Like, when's he going to get his? I mean, that was certainly the Karl Malone one, where it was like, all right, we got to get this guy one, which again is fucked up. But I was so pro Duncan. Like, I was so pro Duncan.
Me too.
Every time I just almost felt like he was still underappreciated in the moment. You're like, do you understand that you're penciling your team in for 50 plus wins every single time, and like something has to go wrong for them not, you know, even though they have some earlier exits than you would maybe realize on the team resume throughout that run. But yeah, I'm sure back in the day I was always arguing with Duncan.
That one was 954 to 897 for Duncan Kidd. 57 first place votes to 45 for Kidd.
Yeah, that's
next
close.
Year, Duncan, yeah, really close. Duncan
okay,
Garnett,
but remember the newness though. Like, never forget, voters are writers. Writers like stories. They like to tell stories. That's right. The Westbrook vote. You know, Westbrook's the guy that kept the money, stayed in OKC, the anti-Durant triple-double. That's a great story. You know, so never forget the impact of storytelling, which is wrong, but it happens.
But so that shifts in the mid-2000s, and I wanted to get to that. The 03 Duncan Garnett, 962 to 871. Duncan had 60 first-place votes. Garnett had 43. Basically, they had the same season, except Duncan's team is better. Nash Shaq is the single closest one we've had, other than Irving Bird in 1981.
That's
Nash,
the 05 one?
Yeah, the Nash was 1066. Shaq was 1032. Nash had 65 first place votes. Shaq had 58. I have MVP columns that you can go back and read dating back to like 2004. And then I did a bunch of stuff in my book about it, about all the years. I went through every year. I had Shaq. I voted for Shaq that year. I had Nash 6th on my ballot. And I was just like, I don't see it. And I had LeBron and Wade over him, and I had Dirk over him.
Wow! Wait, in Nash's first year with Phoenix,
yeah, I had
him
6th
because that's a classic. That's a classic new car smell. Like, Nash has completely changed this team, even though they're still good. But like, it was something that everybody, if you were a neutral fan, it was kind of like some Warriors stuff before Durant got there and everybody got pissed about it, which I understand. But it was like, oh, the Suns are on. Like, I want to watch this. You know,
there's two big things that were going on. One was that the league was horrible to watch. It was a horrible product in 03 and 04. And they changed the hand check rules. But Nash, that was like just a fun team to watch. And we just loved watching them. And he got the most blame. But man, when you go back and you look at their stats, Omari is incredible that year. And the advanced stats are like really favorable to Omari, that actually he probably got fucked over. He should have been top 5 MVP that year. They had Marion, they had Joe Johnson, they had Quentin Richardson, who had the best year of his career. And you could have made the case like there were a lot of nights where you didn't even know Nash was the best guy in that team. '06, I picked Kobe. I think I had Shaq fifth in '06. Kobe, to me, that was that was kind of an anti-narrative thing where people just didn't want to vote for him because of the trial and the Colorado stuff 3 years. But that's why he didn't win. You can spin it all you want now, and you can say he got boned over, but people just weren't ready to vote for him. I voted for him. The '07 one was the one I thought Nash should have won. And that one was 1138 to 1013, 83 for Nowitzki, 44 for Nash. And Nowitzki won because he was due and because of the 67 win thing. I bring this up because I think as we hit the late 2000s and the internet got better and the stats got better, and also like the backlash to people because of Twitter, if you had some guy who's like, you know what? I'm just voting for Jason Tatum for MVP. I don't care about this Jokic, Embiid, Giannis thing. I covered Tatum and I watch him and I just really value what he does. And I don't really care. That's going to be my vote. You can't do that anymore. So I think for the most part, I think if you go through, I've had the same vote as the MVP since 2009 with the 2017 year accepted. I voted for Harden in 2017 over Westbrook. But every other year I've had the MVP vote, and I think most people we've just had consensus. And I think one of the reasons with 2023 why it's become so contentious is because it's the first time we haven't had consensus with 4 weeks left. Like, it's really, to me, I don't know who I'm voting for. If anything, I might be a slight lean to Embiid right now. There's 14 games left. And if it's okay with everybody, I'd like to watch 3 more weeks of basketball and kind of see what happens. Like, Embiid had an awesome game winner the other night. And Jokic had a chance to have game winner today, missed it. Tiny moment, but it matters a little bit. They're playing head-to-head in a week. I'm going to watch that game. If Embiid beats the shit out of Denver again, that's going to matter to me. But my point is, like, can you give us the 80 games? Do we have to decide in game 63 and start yelling at each other? I don't understand it.
Well, I think the problem, too, is that, Tim Bontemps, who does the straw poll, it came out February 16th, and Jokic had 77 of 100, and Embiid had only 6, which is in third place to Giannis, who had 11. By the way, someone in the straw poll gave Durant a 5th place vote. Look.
By the way, that straw poll was totally fair a month ago. Embiid,
it still
over
felt
the last month. I know the 77-6 felt up, but Jokic was in the lead a month ago.
He was. Like, Jokic got off to the bad start, at least on the straw poll, because then Tatum, they're 20-5, 21-5, and it's like, all right, Tatum's clearly better player this year, which I think we'd all agree on. And then Jokic goes on his tear again, and I could sit here all day. I think that the problem is the rising tide raises all boats. Is that when you look at any stats, like if I wanted to just sit here and stump for one guy, I could go. 30 minutes would be a pretty boring podcast, but I go 10 straight minutes, and you would listen to my sell. And you go, how is that guy not the MVP? And what makes it so hard this year is I could do the exact same thing with the 2 other guys, even though Giannis's metrics, some of the analytics stuff for Giannis is like almost undervaluing him a little bit. And I don't know if that's, the plus minus stuff that comes into it gets really weird, because if you look at Jokic, it's off the charts. It's off the charts, but the bench is so bad. So you're like, okay, he's great.
A little bit. Yeah.
Right. Where
it should be one thing you look at, but not the thing.
No, and that's where it hurts Embiid, where it's like, okay, Embiid's plus minus is still really good, but do we go Jokic has that much more of an impact on a game, or does Philly just have a little bit more balance to it where there isn't that much of a drop-off? And that would be unfair to Embiid. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. There's a defensive one, and again, I'm just kind of bringing these up because they're going to be used all the time, so I'm just sort of warning everybody ahead of time. If you go defensive plus minus for every player in the NBA, defensive box score plus minus. Do you know who's number 1?
Tatum?
Jokic.
Really?
Now, I think the guy that came up with the box score plus minus thing was like, it can be really flawed, because if you're a terrific offensive player, it's still a plus minus math that you're looking at here. And Jokic is that good offensively that I think it skews into the whole thing. Like, there's an alley-oop to Claxton, where I actually didn't think Jokic was bad defensively today at all, so we'll see what the kids on Twitter do with it. They were asking him to do a lot. They were having him come way out and show. They were trapping Spencer Dinwiddie. That's why he had 1 million assists, because he was like, look, they were blitzing the hell out of me. He was talking about it in the postgame. And then there was an alley-oop to Claxton where I go, okay, that's a play there where they can't do that to Embiid. Like they can't throw that alley-oop and have Claxton dunk it over the top of him because Embiid is going to make you feel something. If I want to be completely unfair to Embiid, which I wouldn't want to do because I still may end up voting for him because I think he's fucking awesome and he's on this absolute tear, and Philadelphia is now flirting with like a real seeding thing here, which would kind of cancel out where Denver felt like they were running away from it, but now Philly's playing so well. But if I wanted to, I could cut up some stuff of like him having to stay in front of Lillard, which no center is going to be able to do, you know, which would be unfair to Embiid, or the times he's late to show in the first half with a three-point shooter. Because guess what? Guys that are 7'1" that weigh that much aren't going to close out hard on three-pointers all the time. So I never remember it ever being this nasty. There's certainly more skin in the game for me because it's my second year with a vote and I care about it this much. But when I look at the defensive box score stuff, which Jokic voters will use if they vote for him, and will use that and say, oh, his defense actually is way better, and look at all the metrics because there's like contested stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but my eyes don't tell me that. My eyes don't tell me that he's the best defensive box score guy, even though whenever I've looked at some of that plus minus stuff, Bill, I feel like it tells the truth at the extremes, because after Jokic, which again is nuts, Embiid's 10th, by the way, if you look at who else is in the top 5, it's Caruso, it's Giannis, it's Jaren Jackson, and it's Draymond Green. So you're like, okay, wait, that makes sense. But I think it actually speaks to the fact that Jokic is so off the charts offensively that it raises some of that stuff up. Because, and I'll finish here, if you go to the extremes of like the high usage scores that we all think suck on defense, well, who are a bunch of the negatives? Oh, Dame, Beal, Jordan Poole, Trae Young, and then Jalen Green, whatever Houston's trying to do right now, which I know they're trying to lose a million games. It's just bad basketball to watch.
It's working.
But I would end it this way. I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's a really, really hard vote. And it may
that's where you should have landed. Why would you know what we're going to do yet? There's not even in the 70 game mark yet, you know? And that's a part. It should be fun that this is this wide open. Like, and all of this to me is fun.
It's not fun.
It's not fun at all. But on the other hand, I don't think like somebody like my dad doesn't care that people are giving other people shit on Twitter or whatever. I think what's getting lost in a weird way is how great the three players have been. And specifically, I want to talk about Embiid for a second. I do feel like he's better this year than he was last year. I do feel like, and people could throw 100 stats at me and be like, no, actually it's the same. You look at last year and this year. Like, I'm just telling you, watching the game, eye test, like that Portland game the other night, Doc calls timeout. The last play of the game, Embiid's going to have a game winner. He's got Nurkic on him one-on-one. It's a matchup you want every time. And Doc calls timeout with 8 seconds left so he can get Embiid a worse shot, which Embiid makes anyway. I thought the shot was going to go in. Like, to me, Embiid has reached this point where his fucking offensive toolbox that he has now, his face-up stuff, his ability to overpower people. I was thinking about watching Ewing, like, I don't know, late 80s Ewing, when he really had his knees, and he's just this awesome, could face up, could hit long shots, could hit the little jump hook, and he had this whole package. It's like, wow, Ewing. He's really got it together. Like, to me, Embiid is just offensively better than Ewing was. And Ewing was one of the 40 best players of all time. He came really close to the finals a couple of times, lost to Jordan. I think I'm not ready to go there with Hakeem, but I think he's a better offensive player than David Robinson was. I think he had more stuff to his game than Shaq ever did. Shaq was a little more overpowering, but Embiid, I think, brings more to the table. And
whoa, wait a minute. What? Say that Shaq part again.
I think Shaq was more overpowering, but I think
Shaq's footwork was insane, man.
But I'm saying, like, he didn't have the ability to bring people away from the basket like Embiid does. I would say near the basket.
Yeah, this is where Shaq the generational comps.
You know what I mean?
Right, sure, right, okay. I'm never ready to mess with Hakeem ever, so we can.
I'm not Hakeem. We're putting over there. We're putting him on the side. But I think it's just been amazing to watch Embiid's journey over the last 6 years, because he's still, like, the first couple years, even if he was gifted, there was still a clumsiness to him. Remember, he'd fall down a lot, or you'd always be worried like he was going to, like, get hurt. Now
I don't know that's gone away. I'm worried about him getting hurt. But like a pro Embiid thing would be like, there's other players who I think are really talented. We talk about all the time, and then you look at the playoff resume. Like, I actually never really have felt that way about him. I mean, it's a good argument winner if you want to go there with somebody. I just don't really want to, because I like him so much, and I actually have liked him this much the whole time. As you were like, oh, we'll get out of the second round. I mean, the problem is, like, if Jokic wins this MVP and they don't win, and they're not some overpowering Denver team, okay? And I'm not just talking about this week. If they don't win, Jokic,
it's better for Jokic not to win. Let's be honest.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I want to be the guy who's the third dude ever to win 3 MVPs in a row. Okay?
I'm saying from a pressure for trying to win the playoffs this year, in a weird way, it's better for him if Embiid gets this MVP, and then it could be like, all right, let's just try to win the title here.
And that's why the Giannis thing is so crazy, because I have a monologue in my head that I haven't quite done, and we're such dicks. We're dicks when we talk about these guys. And Giannis was headed for Dicktown. He was right in the crosshairs. Bud was going to get fired. It was going to be, this guy, okay, cool, he wins an MVP. And those are just the rules. And sometimes I think it's totally accurate when you're looking at somebody's playoff runs and going, how come this guy doesn't win? Like, that's really what we're doing here and paying attention to. And with Embiid, I'm not, I don't know, maybe I'm being too easy on him. And then the Miami series last year was a mess. The Toronto
the Atlanta series is the toughest one for him.
It is.
I know Simmons. Simmons is a piece of that, but
that's why, that's another entry into
loss.
The mind of Ben Simmons, not your kid. But when he does the stuff and starts talking about what Embiid didn't do in the Toronto series, and you're like, "Fuck, are you serious?" Embiid. At least I know when I'm watching Embiid, if he's losing the playoff series, I don't even count that Heat one because that whole thing was a mess. I think that guy is he's ready. He's up to the task. And there's some late stuff where you're a big guy. The game is just tough for a bigger guy to get all of his stuff on his own anymore. It's just not really the way it's played. You know what? Let me ask you this. Do you think Jokic gets the benefit of the doubt the way a quarterback does? Where when you watch Jokic control everything offensively, and he has more weapons offensively as an offensive player than Embiid does. I mean, the passing alone, right? Not that Embiid isn't a terrific passer, but I mean, this Jokic stuff is insane. Do you think that Jokic almost is treated like a quarterback in comparison to the non-quarterback in the NFL, where the voter has a hard time going, well, how can this other guy be as this important as this dude who literally dictates everything they're doing in every offensive set?
It's a good question. I think you have to go back and you have to compare him to Bird and Magic, and probably Nash to some degree, but especially those 3 MVPs that Magic wins. A lot of it had to do with he makes everybody better. He elevates everybody. Every single player he plays with is a better version of themselves because they're on Magic's team. And I think you could say the same about Jokic, and that's the best case for him. Embiid is more of the traditional, he lifts the team up because he's so good. And that shot he hit at the end of the game on Friday night, that's the traditional awesome MVP shot that we're used to, right? Jokic missed his today. That's not really why you have Jokic. He's more of, whatever. Jokic is a connector and he's an elevator, and Embiid is an overpowerer. And sometimes it can be a taste thing, which is why it's good that you have 100 voters.
All right, let me ask you another question kind of along the same lines. When I see these videos that are popping up more and more now about Kobe and players talking about Kobe, right? There's this reverence. And I think it also is this incredibly sad ending to his life that's
a big piece of it,
can prop up people just don't want to start sitting there and criticizing somebody who's not around anymore, right? I mean, we do it with musicians all the time or whatever, but Kobe was so impressive physically. There was this dynamic ability, beyond all the numbers and all this other stuff. You knew when it was what are you going to do with this guy? You talk to other teams, right? Other people in the front office would be like, that fucking guy. And the same thing happens with ex-players. And yet I'm sure plenty of people think I'm wrong here. I would rather have Duncan to be the anchor of my franchise, especially then when you go through the Duncan and Kobe career. I would just rather have what Duncan was.
You know where I stand on that one.
Right. When I see these all-time lists and people are I think Arenas had another, and he's been on a heater all season. I think he said Russell Westbrook was the key for who was coming out of the West. He was right. If you don't have Kobe in your top 5, and I'm thinking okay, wait a minute, does that mean Duncan? I think most people would have Kobe ahead of Duncan. So the reason I bring that up is this question to you. Do you think Jokic is kind of Duncan and Embiid is Kobe, in that when Embiid is going physically, it's so much more impressive than anything Jokic does?
Fair question. To me, the Duncan Kobe thing was pretty obvious the whole time. Duncan's teams were always 55 wins no matter who was on his team. And he won a title in 2003 with really nobody and beat Shaq and Kobe together. And I don't think he had an all-star on that team other than him. I think the problem with this MVP thing is that we just have three awesome choices. Now, Giannis might fade out because he's doing things like he skipped the Saturday night ABC thing. Like if Giannis could have played in that Warriors game yesterday, I know he's a little banged up, but he could have put up 42 and 25 against the Warriors yesterday, and then people would be going today, oh, it's Giannis.
You're
I just
right.
think the choices are really hard. I remember I went back. One of the things I did in my book was I was trying to figure out the 1981 MVP race. And this was a different era where everybody kind of would decide who the MVP was halfway through the season. And everybody decided it was Julius Erving's MVP. It was time for him to win one. And then something weird happened down the stretch where the Celtics started playing really well and Bird started to have some monster games. And it was kind of closer than people realized. Final game of the season, they're playing in Boston. Celtics beat them. Bird's great. Bird has like 5 steals in the first quarter, and he's just the best player on the floor. But Irving won the MVP because it had kind of already been decided. I was like, whatever. Nobody really cared about the MVP the same way back then. I think that's an old way of thinking about the MVP where people would kind of decide around game 60 who was going to win it or what the narrative was. And that was kind of what takes hold. Now people get mad at the narrative even when nothing has unfolded yet. And it's game 63 and people are flipping out and accusing people of already decided of whatever. Jokic was the MVP favorite for the first 2/3 of the season. I think Embiid, with what he's done in the last month, not only has closed the gap, but I think he's going to pass him. Like, I think Embiid or Giannis is going to win the MVP because I don't think the West matters as much to the Nuggets or Jokic, and I see them fading back. So, like on FanDuel today, Embiid was plus 250. To me, Jokic and Embiid should be even because Embiid's on a mission. And I got to say, as a voter, if it's dead even, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, should Embiid have one of these? If it's 2-1, Jokic versus Embiid versus 3-0, like that is going to be a factor this year for people. Maybe it won't be one of the top 10 variables, but it'll be something you think about. Like, he is kind of due. Like if it's this even and the records are even and everything's even, yeah, fuck it. And I think that's why he has a real chance.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the recency thing, like even with Giannis, like I had a moment, I don't know, 2 weeks ago where I started flirting in that direction where I was like, I might just do it. You know, he's the best player in the league. They're going to be the 1 seed in the East. I'd pick him against any other team. Like, what do I need to make it this complicated? Like I saw a stat the other day that talked about how Embiid was on pace for the best scoring per 36 that we've seen since Wilt. And I was like, wait, what? And Giannis is actually ahead of that at per 36. But Giannis isn't technically a center. So I was like, okay, that felt a little disingenuous. It's like, we've never seen anybody ever do this before. And it's like, well, we're actually seeing another guy do it. They just have a different letter next to their name when they check in a game. So there's a lot of it. It'll be funny because everybody thinks all the Jokic stuff was because of advanced metrics, which it wasn't, because Embiid was terrific in the same metrics. He was just behind Jokic in a lot of them last year. It would be funny if Giannis ended up winning it because the metrics, he doesn't really stand up to the other guys. And it depends on how much importance you put on it. Like, I don't know how many of the 100 voters are like default VORP guys. You know, I think that there's a lot. I just don't think it's 50. I don't know if it's 10. I don't know if it's 20. I don't know if it's all win shares because you start doing that stuff. Like, I would never just look at that and go, okay, that's my vote.
But you know what's funny about this, though, is that isn't it good not to have groupthink, to have people disagree? Like, isn't that the whole point of this? I think everybody complains, especially the last 6 years in the country, where it's like, oh, everybody is so polarized on these one or two sides. And you have to either have to think your side or the other side. And there's no nuance. There's nothing in between. This is the ultimate example of how there should be nuance. And it is way like right now we're taping, it's 4:33 now Pacific time. The Sixers are up 10 halfway through the third quarter against Washington. And Embiid has 26 points already. Like, he's going to have another 40-point game. There was some stat about how he'd had, I think, 23 35-point games this year. And this is looking like this is going to be his 24th. Like, he's probably going to end the season with 32 to 35-point games. And I know the stats are weird this year, and they've been harder than ever to compare history to now because the offense is so up. But he's having one of the best offensive seasons by a center ever from a scoring standpoint. So,
and he stays on this tear. I think your recency thing, like the reason I didn't get to it, but like if Giannis had gone off on a Saturday ABC game, even against a Warriors team that we can't figure out, you're right, because it would have turned into a hey, and you have to wonder, like, what's the percentage of voters that are actually impressionable enough to see a week of like, is Giannis the guy coverage that actually makes that person think differently about their vote? It's not zero. Again, I know. I think the NBA tries to do a really good job.
Westbrook. Remember this happened. Westbrook, it was dead even everybody. And then Westbrook had a couple big games. I remember he had one awesome Sunday night game. He had like a comeback win game. And then all of a sudden it was just everybody's like, all right, vote for that guy. And that's the whole point. Like when you have even races like this, it is going to come down to the last couple of weeks. And you can call it recency bias, but in this case, these guys are really playing for something. The Sixers have a chance to get the 2 seed now. They might even have a chance to get the 1 seed. Denver's trying to hold on to their 1 seed, and the Bucks are trying to hold on the 1 seed. So there's real stakes. Teams are playing head to head, and I think the next, I don't think it's rocket science. Say the next 3 weeks are going to decide it, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, and I have no idea. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I think like a lot of people before this Embiid tear, you were like, yeah, Jokic is probably the favorite, and it felt like the right call. You shouldn't go, well, I'm not voting for him because I don't want it to be a 3 in a row. But I don't, look, man, I can't say it. I've said it too many times already. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
One of my MVP questions that, and I read the MVP column, I would have the 4 questions, and one of them was like, who will you remember first about this season, stuff like that. And one of them is, if it's a pickup game, and you could take anyone in the league, who's the first pick based on how they're playing this season?
I would take Giannis.
I would take Giannis too.
I might want to play with Jokic more, and then I'd be like, well, who's calling his own fouls? And I think right. Giannis would call the least amount of his own fouls. I think Jokic might call the most. But if Harden were playing with Embiid in the pickup game, then I'd be like, well, if they're together, then they're calling their own fouls. Like, we might as well just pack up.
I think I'd be the most afraid. Yeah, if that happens.
Did you see the NBA tweeted out Harden's free throw record thing? I almost said something, and I was like, don't, just let it go.
That was a good.
Let it go a week.
I will say, in that pickup game question, I think Embiid is the guy in the league now that if he's not taken first, he would take it the most personally, and you'd probably be in the most danger. AKA the Kobe Bryant rule. He was like, Embiid's like, I went third. Like, even in the All-Star game, Embiid fucking tried in the All-Star game. Like, Jokic could have given a shit, right? He's like, why am I here? This sucks. I hate this.
There's nothing from the All-Star game I'll ever use.
No, I know, but I was like, I'm just saying, right. Embiid is always gonna give some sort of shit about the game he's in. Where, I don't know, that might mean nothing, might mean anything. I just feel like...
Who would I want to play with, though? Yeah, I probably want to play with Jokic because you get shots.
But you'd have to make sure you put the right team with him, right? Or you'd be like, oh, we don't want Jordan Poole with Jokic because now we have a Bones Highland situation. I almost said Bones Murray. I don't know who Bones Murray is.